Good morning, everyone. On an earlier version of SafeDefend Live, joined again by Director of Training, Dr. Greg Vecchi. Dr. V, what's going on, brother?
I'm doing well. Getting ready for Christmas. Pretty excited about that. How about yourself?
Same. We've got big high school football games here. I don't know if you know this, but one of my hobby of mine for the last 20 years or so is we call high school football games. I do color commentary. And we've been lucky enough for the last several years. We do all the state championship games in the state of Oklahoma. So did the first game last night. I do 2 today, 2 tomorrow, and then 2 next Saturday. So I get to do, what is that, 8 games, 7 games?
Do you ever sleep, Phil?
No, you call sleeping even when you're dead. You know that, Dr. No. We're, so a lot of fun things. Had a great Thanksgiving. I hope everybody joining us had a wonderful Thanksgiving as well. And I'm going to jump right into this. Dr. V, there's a lot of things that people, I think we just think about active killing, active shooting as a type of violence. There's all different types of violence that people have to be aware of. True?
Oh, absolutely correct. And frankly, you have to really understand the type of violence in order to have the best chance of preventing it.
So walk us through kind of what some of those are and give us scenarios, and most importantly, some quick tips, ideas, solutions, things like that.
Okay. Well, I guess where I'd like to start on this is just, talking about definitions. I've said this probably a million times, and I'll probably say it a million times again. Words mean something. Words are important, right? And so definitions are also just as important when you're trying to deal with prevention of violence or responding to violence and things like that, especially the type of violence we're talking about, school violence, university, workplace violence, and things like that. And so proper definitions or operationalizing the definitions is really important. And we often, though, hear the definitions or they come from more like a kind of emotional perspective, like, they're evil, they're monsters.
Yeah.
And when you use a moral or ethical, even a legal definition in furtherance of preventing or responding to or mitigating this type of violence, it doesn't work real well. It just doesn't translate. And so when you're talking about, best practices, they really got to be based on research-based things, things that have validity and rigor and reliability and all this, the geek stuff that researchers do, but it really is important. So operationalizing definitions, having the right definitions is really important to start with.
Well, what are some of the things? I mean, break some of those down for us.
Okay. So if you kind of look at violence by definition, or kind of how it basically plays out, okay, you deal with violence based on the type of violence, based on the category. So for example, I guess at kind of the 20,000 foot level, you got 2 categories of violence. You have violence that would be considered expressive violence, and violence that is considered instrumental violence. And so just knowing the difference right there determines like how you would deal with the situation. Expressive violence is emotional driven, right? It's emotion based. Okay. It's usually defensive in nature. Typically it's more acute versus chronic. And I'll touch on that, why that's important in our work, right? And it kind of is somewhat explosive. It usually is driven by fear or rage, the crimes of passion type stuff that you hear about. Guy goes home and he finds out that his wife has cheated on him. That type of violence, or barricaded, situations where someone loses their job or gets fired, and then they take the boss, hostage, right? And all that is expressive type violence. Also, protective, like protecting your young, right? A mother, prime example, protecting their kids. In nature, a bear protecting her cubs, mother bear, that type of stuff. So that's expressive violence. And that's really what we're not talking about here. We're talking about more instrumental.
So give us, as it applies to schools, give us, because I'm sure there's categories of of violence that you'd see in schools. Walk through some of those for me.
Okay, well, we have to move on to understanding what instrumental violence is, and that's really the type of violence, or the bigger category violence that we're talking about. It's not necessarily emotion based. I mean, certainly there is anger and emotions associated with it, but it's instrumental from the standpoint that it's cognitive based. It's not defensive; it's offensive, and at least in like schools and campus and workplace violence situations that we're concerned with, it's much more chronic, meaning it's a little bit longer term because there's a process of planning and preparation associated with it. It's also calculated, it's
Okay.
targeted, and at the end of the day, it's predatory. And then we have some different aspects of predatory violence that I'll get into in just a second.
Okay. So what can employees at companies, schools, so what can they be looking for?
Well, first off, what type of instrumental violence or what type of predatory violence are we talking about? Because again, we go down to sub definitions, right? Because you would deal with each one a little bit different.
Right.
So, for example, you're a serial killer type guy, right? Okay, that person would be considered more of a process predator. They're into it just because they like it. They like the violence. They like the control. They like that type of thing, right? The other type of a predator would be more like a resource predator. These are your robberies, right? People that are going after money, going after some sort of resources. Might even be someone who's assassinating someone for life insurance, something like that. And then we get to the one that we're concerned about here, and that's what I like to refer to as the grievance predator. And this is someone that feels persecuted, they feel wronged, and or they've experienced a significant loss. And when you break it down even further, you can talk about the grievance predator in terms of past, present, and future, meaning that if you have, for example, a kid that's bullied, right, and he's afraid to come to school, and he's can't take the bullying anymore, right? He feels persecuted, right? That's more like a future type fear, grievance type stuff. People that have been wronged in the past, right? That's a past, and then of course any specific ongoing, like right now, significant loss that's going on is also part. So it's this grievance predator that we're focused on.
So if you're an administrator, a teacher, a staff member of any kind, let's say school first, and if it was a private business, it could be any employee, manager, HR, owner of a company, and you see for school, you see a young man or woman who's constantly being picked on for whatever reason, ridiculed. Good thing to do is to intervene there, obviously, and have conversations with those doing the picking, and probably that young person as well, right?
Yes, when you've got enough evidence and a good like threat assessment program going on, where you're kind of doing it the right way, where you're trying to avoid false negatives and false positives. That's actually absolutely the right way to go. The other thing is that beyond categories, you're talking about the employee or the child or the student or things like this. That's only like one of four types of violence that's in the literature, relating to workplace violence and this type of, grievance predator. Your first type is your kind of your criminal intent, your stranger violence, which is just, someone coming in like robbing a bank, right? You don't know the guy, he's a stranger, he comes in and does it. That's one type of violence that you got to prepare for. There's not a lot of, that's probably the least preventative type of violence. Because you have you just don't know, right? Unless you get intel or information on that, it just happens. You don't expect it. It's fast. It's violent and it's problematic, right? So in that type of a situation, obviously mitigating things like simple things like your physical security stuff, door locks and security people and metal detectors and cameras and things like that. In addition to having like an open environment where people can feel safe or feel comfortable, talking about things that might indicate this type of a problem. The other type of violence, which is a little bit different, is the customer, client, patient, visitor type, where the person becomes violent. They're like a user of your service or user of your product, and they don't. They become violent because they get hostile because they feel that you did them wrong. They feel that they got ripped off or whatever. Again, physical security stuff. But this one here I've noticed is that a lot of people that deal with customers, people that deal with the recipients of their service, are now being taught a lot of good active listening, empathetic type communication. And I think that's really important because you get a person who is very angry and they said, you know what, I bought this, I bought this item, I bought this stereo, it didn't work, it's a piece of crap. I want my money back, and it's been over 30 days. And I was told I couldn't get my money back, and it's expressive, right? It's
Right.
expressive violence, right? And so coming back, instead of saying, well, I'm sorry, sir, that's the policy, right? And that very well may be. You can soften that, by just simply saying, man, it really sounds like you sound really frustrated about that. Let's talk about what we can do about that, right? And so instead of maybe giving a return, you get like a 20% discount on your next purchase, something like this, and you try to finesse it so it's not so, well, I'm sorry, sir, that's the policy, right? And then all that does is ramp them up, right? So that's another type of violence, right?
We actually just saw that. We actually just saw that here in Oklahoma this past week, where a disgruntled customer went into an insurance agency and attempted to kill an individual in the agency, and then took his own life. We saw that just this week here in the Oklahoma City area.
Oh wow, yeah. Yeah, so that's that's another type. The other type, which again is hard to prevent unless you have open communication with your employees, is you have the personal, intimate type violence where it's husband, the strange husband, the boyfriend, the stalker, comes in and with the intent to hurt the person that they love or that they like or whatever their fixation is. They come in and hurt them, in the process hurt a lot of other people. And then lastly is really the most preventive, surprisingly the most preventive of these is the very things that we're looking at here to try to round it off here. The current former student, the coworker, the former coworker. These are actually about, depending on the stat, 75-80% of what we deal with, right?
Yeah.
And this is where SafeDefend comes in, right? SafeDefend is great for all of these when you can't prevent it, right? And that's the focus. And we have to be honest about this, is that no matter how preventive we are, how much information, how good we are, there are lots of things that happen where prevention, can't take place.
Right.
Okay, and that's where we have that way to deal with it, right? In response, right, which is excellent. Now, as far as the preventive piece here, I kind of want to finish off here with this, is that this type of current coworker, employee, current student, things like this, these are really your most preventative because you can get a baseline on them, right? You know what's normal for that person. And when someone goes into crisis, right, they feel persecuted, right? They got a grievance, right? That's what we call a grievance predator, right? You've got, that person goes into crisis because, right, they feel persecuted. They know they're going to get bullied when they get to school, or they feel that they were wronged by a person, maybe a boss or the organization, or that there's a major loss, in their life, and they're associating that with the school or workplace or campus or whatever. Those changes, right, when they go into crisis on that, and again, this goes back to the proper definition. They're not necessarily monsters and evil, but they're people in crisis, right? And so if you deal with them from that perspective, then you have the ability to look at, okay, what's their normal behavior, what we call the baseline behavior, and what's their abnormal behavior because they're in crisis and they're trying to deal with it. And then we move on. I'm not going to get into it today, but we got other times to talk about this, planned lethal violence stairway, right? This path of violence out there, because I do want to spend a lot of time on that, because that is your basic structure, your basic roadmap for prevention. And then based on wherever the level of threat is there, then you can choose the best engagement or interaction or intervention that you want to do with them.
Well, Dr. V, there's a ton of stuff in this one subject matter area, and I know we'll talk more about that in the weeks to come. I want to thank everybody for joining today. Dr. V, I want to thank you. Appreciate everything that you're
My
doing
pleasure. Thank you for having
to
me.
make people safer. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's the name of the game. So we appreciate everybody for joining us today on SafeDefend Live. Dr. V, have a beautiful weekend, and we'll
You too.
talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.